So, gentlemen, what I want this to be like is like a Shabbat dinner in Israel. I want you to interrupt each other. I want you to argue. I don't want this to be polite.
Just don't tell me we have to
standard,
sing.
like, Israeli Shabbat dinner. But starting with rebuttals of each other. You two this is the third debate that these gentlemen have had together.
Second or third?
I think second.
Second? Okay, second.
Well, we sort of did a thing in Jerusalem that wasn't really.
That's right. That wasn't really much of a discussion.
No, because I spoke and you didn't. That was
Right.
great. Yeah.
You heard the official bios that I read that were both from your respective web pages. Let's start with Jeremy rebutting Daniel. Beyond the propaganda on his web page or the propaganda on your web page, rebut this guy. What do you think of him? Is he Meshuggah?
I just find it really depressing. I mean, I think it is very, very hard for me to look at the situation today. It's kind of like the Titanic to me, seeing an iceberg dead ahead, that the state of Israel is in is a real, real problem. And what you're saying basically is let's just rearrange the deck chairs. And I'm saying I may not be able to change the course, but I want to be a part of trying to save the ship. We may have had one too many nautical metaphors at dinner, but
Yes, Captain.
I think that the notion that there is nothing that can be done is simply wrong. I think that the notion that the greatest thing that the state of Israel ever accomplished was behind it and coming into existence in 1948, and all we can do today is just protect it and try to hold on. I think we have to try to shape a better future. And I don't think this is starry-eyed optimism. I think this is the spirit of Zionism. And so to me, that's just, it's depressing that this is the best you can come up with. And I don't think it's inspirational to people in this country to be connected to Israel. I would hope that you have some hope of greater connection. And I don't think that it's inspirational to people in Israel. That there isn't a solution to this problem that is going to ultimately cost Israel its Jewish and democratic nature. I can rebut the other pieces too, if you like.
Daniel.
That, I think, is actually, in all of our various conversations over the course of time, the most important 3 minutes that we've had. And I'm 100% serious about that. Because that focuses exactly where we disagree. And I agree with you, it's totally depressing. But the fact that it's depressing doesn't mean it ain't so. And the fact that it's depressing doesn't mean that all I got to do is sort of hold on for dear life. I think Israel's doing unbelievable things. I think there's a revival of Jewish peoplehood in Israel that we missed the mark about. There is a revival of forgetting all the high-tech stuff. I mean, it's good for the economy and it's kind of interesting. But there's a revival of the Jewish people in the state of Israel that you know and you feel every time that you're there that I think is the real story. What is the state of Israel really? It's a bunch of Jews going to a really bad neighborhood to try to build a poor country? I mean, that's how we actually tell the story, but that's not how I understand the story at all. The story of the state of Israel is the story of a people that came home, is trying to rebuild itself after the worst century that it's known, at least in 2,000 years, and has done a pretty unbelievably admirable job of doing all sorts of incredible things. Building a democracy when people came from non-democratic countries, world-ranked universities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, it's depressing, but it's not the whole picture. So I'm also depressed about it. I'm also worried about it. But I'm not going to allow that worry or that sense of being depressed to delude me into thinking that the Palestinians are other than they are. And here's where you and I fundamentally disagree. And you're not going to convince me, and I'm not going to convince you. Neither of us are going to convince anybody in the room who's already come with their preconceived notions, which is totally fine. But the Palestinian culture is simply not what you want it to be.
And
That's the bottom line.
I find that to be such an offensive statement.
I know, because you're an American and I'm an Israeli.
No, it's because I know Palestinians and I've spent enough time with them.
I know Palestinians too, but let's talk about the ones who are in charge. Abbas has show me the Palestinian major leader who has ever said, the Jews are also indigenous to this region.
So Danny, you prefer Arafat?
Well, I prefer him where he is.
No, well, but here's the point. Here's the point. I mean, when do we get to choose who we get to debate with? When there's a problem. I mean, Abu Mazen is not Yasser Arafat, when do you expect there to be a better Palestinian leader than Abu Mazen? A more reasonable.
and I also-
whatever you think of him, and I don't disagree with anything you've said.
You can stop right there. That's good.
But I do disagree that we should wait for some mythical person to come along on the other side who acts like we want him to act.
But also,
we wouldn't do
you
that.
can't
Why should they?
misrepresent him. I mean, I think that you're misrepresenting him. I mean, he's been on Israeli TV just in the last couple of weeks. As you know, he just had a group of Israeli students come to the Mukata in Ramallah and said many of the things you're asking him to say. You're telling these folks that he doesn't say these things, and it's simply not true. Let me just quote
How
you.
many people who were at the Mukata with him have you spoken to?
I spoke to the journalists who were there.
Okay, but my students were there.
Right.
They came back devastated. I got 2 students at Shalem College. One of them actually kippah, tzitzis, out, the whole, battle combat uniform thing, comes up and says to me, our students are actually not allowed to miss class. Sorry, Emory students, we have a different policy. And he says, I'm not going to be here next, whatever it is. I said, fine, where are you going to be? He goes, I'm going to be in Ramallah. Like, you are going to be in Ramallah? And then he said, I'm going to this thing at the Mukata. They came back, actually, and then another woman who went with him who's not religious, came back, actually, very saddened that he actually wouldn't say that Jews were indigenous to the region, and B, instructively, he would take no questions from the audience. They thought, that's that? He invites 300 Israeli students to Ramallah, and then he won't take a single question.
But he's been interviewed on
But
Israeli
Jeremy, that's my
television
point. But I think we're
with reporters from Israel asking him the toughest possible questions.
So why won't he take questions from Israeli students who are brave enough to go to Ramallah? Here's the bottom line.
But that's not the issue.
You're not answer my question.
I'm trying to. He keeps interrupting me. Anyway, I think the question is, what can we do in the meantime? I mean, what should Israel do? Should Israel move back to 67 borders unilaterally when the Palestinians have not agreed to end the conflict? Why should we do that when you yourself acknowledge that there are then people who are going to press for all the refugees to still come back? Why should Israel make what is the only massive concession that it can make, which
Why
is the
not try to
territorial-
make a deal? Why not pursue
I think
what's
that's
being
exactly
pursued
what
right
we're
now?
doing.
Right.
And Bibi says, we're going to make a deal. We're going to give you land. You're going to recognize us as a Jewish state. And Abbas says in last week's New York Times, that is, and I quote, completely out of the question. Therefore, we can't make a deal.
Right, but I mean, Netanyahu says certain things are completely out of the question. For instance, splitting Jerusalem and allowing the Palestinians to have a capital in East Jerusalem. And so the Palestinians say there'll never be a deal because look what Bibi's saying. But when a deal is reached, and there actually is a compromise on Jerusalem, and there is a compromise on the Jewish state question, and there is mutual recognition, what they said the night before they would never do, they will have done. That's the nature of diplomacy and negotiations. That's what happens when you reach a deal. And in fact, I just want to say on the Jewish state issue that it's not the phrase Jewish state isn't the be-all and the end-all. I mean, maybe we can just tease that out a little bit for the audience here. I think that the issue is the recognition of Israel as the national home of the Jewish people and the expression of the national rights, the communal rights of the Jewish people to a nation, and Palestine should be the same thing for the Palestinian people. If you put it that way, and you say that's the deal, it's mutual recognition of the aspirations of both people, then the Palestinians will say yes. They won't say yes to simply the question, will you recognize Israel as a Jewish state? The answer to that is no, in and of itself. But if it's part of a deal in which there's mutual recognition and end of conflict, then the answer is yes.
If you were the head of the Palestinian Authority, we'd be able to make a deal.
But this is what Palestinians are discussing right now.
Yes, but
in
not the ones at the top. Here's the difference. I think that the critical point here, and I think this is a very valuable conversation actually. The critical point is what you said at the beginning. And it's our fundamental disposition. I don't mean yours and mine, although perhaps, but it's our fundamental disposition as communities. And I think this is really, really, really super important. You find it really depressing and therefore unbearable, and it's not going to be able to inspire young Jews to embrace, et cetera, et cetera. We also find it depressing, but kind of that's what it is. I know Israeli kids who are leaving Israel because the conflict
But I mean, like, take global warming. Do
Do
you just accept global warming and say, well, that's how it is, we shouldn't do anything, we shouldn't try to switch to non-carbon fuels? the Earth
I
is
was
going to...
watching, I was watching your
Let's
highways.
leave the global warming
No,
debate
but I'm just
for
saying, if
another
there's a
night.
big problem out there, do you just say, oh my goodness, there's a terrible big problem coming and there's nothing I can do, or do you try to fix it?
No, you do try to fix it. That's why I think the Israelis and the Palestinians are actually sitting and talking. But to try to pressure Israel to make more accommodations, which we both know has long been your position, I don't know if you've moved. Maybe you have.
I was going to say, to say that you know why J Street was founded is kind of ironic. I think I have a better sense of why J Street was founded than you do. And
I hope so.
J Street was not founded to pressure Israel. J Street was founded in order to provide a voice in American politics and in the American Jewish communal discussion on Israel that reflects the views that I'm saying that didn't exist before. That's why we founded J Street. It's not to pressure Israel. Our mission is here in the United States to change the political dialogue, to change the Jewish communal conversation.
Let's talk about dialogue. People are very passionate about these issues. There is a lot of stuff out there about how we're not allowed to air our dirty laundry. We're not allowed to talk about this or that. What should we not be allowed to talk about?
We American Jews about Israel, you mean,
Yeah.
on that issue? I don't think there's anything. I think that American Jews should be able to talk about whatever they want to talk about Israel. You'd be very hard-pressed, I think, to find anything that I've ever written or said that says anything to the contrary.
What about, for example, what's been going on with some American colleges and Hillel, for example, Swarthmore, where they're being told that they shouldn't have certain people speak to them?
Okay, that's a question of not whether American Jews should be able to say anything, it's a question of whether a specific audience, a specific organization should be host to a series of viewpoints that are anathema to what its position is. I don't know anything about what happens in Hillel. I don't live in this country anymore. It would be foolish for me to take a position on what Hillel should or should not do. But at Swarthmore, which is obviously a reasonably sized, excellent liberal arts college, the idea that a person can't speak in Hillel, therefore his or her voice is going to be silenced, is foolish. They could speak at a whole bunch of other kinds of places. So again, I'm not taking a stand on what Hillel's position should or should have been, or not have been. But whatever that was about, I don't believe, look, I'm sitting here in a conversation with Jeremy Ben-Ami, with whom I disagree about a lot of things. If I really thought that we shouldn't have the dialogue, I wouldn't fly to Atlanta where there's a danger that the highways are going to freeze overnight and I'll never get out of here ever again. And you know, I wouldn't do that. I've debated Peter Butler. Now, there are people, by the way, that I won't debate. There are people that I won't debate, and I think it's really important that Jeremy pointed out. I would not sit on the couch and have a conversation with a person from anywhere in the BDS movement. Because when you're talking about boycotting, sanctioning, and divesting from Israel, until such time as, among other BDS requirements, all the refugees are allowed back into Israel, what you want to do is destroy Israel as a Jewish state. I have nothing to talk to you about. Nothing to talk to you about.
But you were willing to talk to Peter Beinart, who,
Yeah, because he's not into it. He's not
in
anywhere.
Atlanta was disinvited.
Okay. He was disinvited and then he came back to a bigger audience. So that should only happen to me one day. But
But it is an unhealthy phenomenon. I mean,
I grant you that it's an unhealthy phenomenon. It's an unhealthy phenomenon when the same thing happens to the right. I'm sure that if Naftali Bennett, who whatever you want to say about him, is, I don't know, is the smartest guy in the world, but he's a pretty smart guy. And he's given his due to his country, and he has a certain view, and it's not completely illogical. I don't agree with it, but it's not completely illogical. I'm going to bet you that if Naftali Bennett were invited to this congregation on a certain evening, the hall would be much less filled. And I think that's sad. I think that we, generally speaking, tend to listen to people with whom we already agree. I mean, I can tell you this. I mean, I think that in general, you and I have both found this, I'm sure, that people basically that disagree with us don't want to hear us talk. Right. And what makes this evening so wonderful is that people are coming to hear one person that they probably think they're more inclined to agree with, but also a person that they're not inclined to agree with. And horror of horrors, they're going to see them actually talking to each other in a kind of reasonably civilized fashion. So, but the answer to your question,
which will probably
Dave,
get you in trouble in some quarters, and vice versa.
Where's he going to get me in trouble?
You know, some people don't, you know, think that if you even sit on a couch next to somebody, you're endorsing their point of view.
Well, that's just stupid. I mean, you can sit on a couch with a lot of different people and not endorse their view. For 32 years, I've been sitting on a couch with the same woman. I've hardly ever endorsed the view of hers. And she has certainly never endorsed the view of mine. And you know, she's actually in New York. So the last thing she said to me today, she goes, "Remember, don't be stupid." So no, I think you can sit on a couch. You can share a bedroom with people that you don't agree with. We should learn to talk to each other. If you're asking me what are the things that should be outside the plane, so I'll tell you there are things that are outside the plane. You find my view of Abbas offensive. You're right. But you would agree that I didn't say anything like Arabs have no right to a country, the Palestinians are not a real people, the Palestinians have no human rights, the Palestinians are subhuman. I didn't say anything like that. I mean, I don't believe anything like that, so there'd be no reason for me to say anything like that. I think those kind of views are anathema, and the Jewish community should shun them. But let me just, on the opposite side is, I think that since the future of the Jewish people, and I don't mean this lightly, and this is true, the future of the Jewish people depends on the survival of Israel as a Jewish democratic state. Jewish life in Atlanta, God forbid, Israel goes down, which, by the way, is a very real possibility. Even money, Israel's around in 50 years. Even money. But if Israel's not around in 50 years, don't delude yourself into thinking that life at the temple or at Temple Sinai goes on unchanged. Life here is very, very, very different. We all have a vested interest, whether we're Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, whatever. We all have a vested interest in this. And therefore, I think people from BDS should be shunned. And they should not have space on this bima. Because when you are now trying to undo Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, you are then an enemy of the Jewish people. And I don't care if you're Jewish. And you should have no voice in the Jewish world.
The one thing I would just want to slightly modify is that, I think that there is a mistake that we make as a community when we refuse to engage the folks from BDS. And it makes the allure of it that much greater, particularly on college campuses. And I think the more that we say, oh, you poor young minds, you can't hear from this point of view, the more it seems like, well, wait a minute, maybe that's the point of view I want to hear from. I think it's very important to appear with and to debate the folks who are believing in BDS. I think that there are really important arguments to make in front of audiences of people who don't really understand this point. And so I tend to believe that it's a mistake for the established Jewish community. In fact, the established Jewish community often turns to J Street and says, you go debate them, you go talk to them, because they think we can engage with them. And then we get attacked, of course, for appearing with the folks from, who believe in BDS. But I think it is really a mistake to refuse to engage with people who we really disagree with, because it does tend to make people think, well, what are they trying to hide? What is it that they don't want to hear? So I think we should engage, I think we should debate, and I think we should have a slightly more open tent.
Okay, the only thing that I'll say is I don't disagree with you. I agree with you that it's a mistake not to debate people that we disagree with. That's why you and I are having this conversation. I will not debate someone whose position is the destruction of the country that I believe is the future of my people. I'm not prepared to have a conversation with you. You want to debate them, that's every bit you're right. I'm not going to actually criticize you for having that conversation. But you can't ask me to have a conversation with somebody like that, and I'm going to use the following, really knowingly that it's loaded, but any more than you would ask me to have a conversation with a neo-Nazi. They are both actually trying to destroy the future of my people. Go do your thing, but don't expect me to engage you. I'm not prepared to do it. If you are, that's fine.
Okay, so, Jeremy, what's the most existential threat facing Israel, internal or external? For you, what is it?
Well, obviously, for me, it is the failure to resolve this conflict with the Palestinian people, because I think that this is the core challenge that's existed for 65 years is, there were these other folks there when the initial Zionists got there. And
when your ancestors went to Petah Tikva, they were settlers.
Right.
Okay.
Right, no, absolutely. And, I agree with you as well that, we have to understand that the people who went to the West Bank are an extension of that whole movement. And I think that the people who went there, sent by their government to do something that, was very, very Zionist and very nationalist, need to be welcomed back as heroes, need to be brought back to Israel. But I think that's
you certainly understand that is not at all the tenor of the conversation when one says settlers. I mean,
absolutely.
this is,
I think it's a
you
big
understand
mistake.
that that's a huge problem
right.
on the left.
It's a huge problem. I totally agree with you.
Would you agree with me, by the way, also that if there ever were to be a deal and Israel pulled back out of 96% of the West Bank, that every single Jew in this room should sit that day, and with all of the joy that we feel about the fact that there is we should celebrate on one hand the signing on the White House lawn, don't hold your breath, but at the same time, we should actually also fast because Jews are actually leaving their ancestral homeland. Could you say that?
Yeah, and I think it's this is something that isn't understood enough. I think people who go to Judea and Samaria, who go to the West Bank, don't understand that that's where the roots of the Jewish people are. And so I know we just finished a tour on the West Bank with our leadership, and I take them to Shiloh, right? And we go and we meet with settlers and we hear their story, because I think it really is important for people to understand this isn't a bunch of, 300,000 religious fanatics who have gone there to take over another people's land. There are people there who really are going home in their view, and I think it's very important for us to understand that. That having been said, they must leave. If Israel is to survive, that 50-year horizon, again, I find it depressing to think that the state of Israel won't be there in 50 years, and that makes me want to act. I think that's the ultimate fulfillment of the Zionist dream. The first generation were the pioneers, the next generation built, the next generation fought, and now we have to make peace. We have to finish this work. We have to, and this is the challenge.
And you'd
to
be
my
out of a
mind.
job.
I would love to be out of a job, because then I'd work on global warming.
Okay, so Daniel, for you, what's the most existential threat, internal, external, facing Israel?
There are a lot of threats. When a patient gets brought into an emergency room with multiple system collapse, you got to fix all the systems of the patient doesn't survive. But I actually think that the most existential threat to Israel is the meltdown of the Middle East. Israel, for a very long time, had an entirely quiet border with Egypt, with an oppressive but nonetheless secular Muslim government that wanted to keep the peace, and it's now very unclear what's going to be the case on the Egyptian border. It is not at all clear that Jordan is going to survive. The idea that Morocco, Tunisia, Yemen, Egypt, I missed a bunch of them, Syria, are all going to fall to this Arab alleged spring. It's not a spring, it's an awakening, I think. It's an Arab awakening. It's a recognition by Arab citizens that they want to be heard, but it's not leading to democracy and women's rights and rights for gays and lesbians and freedom of the press and freedom of association. It's not leading to any of that. So it's not really a spring. Why should Jordan survive this in the long run? Is Israel's longest border then going to fall into the hands of a people, of a nation that is mostly Palestinian and only minority Hashemite? The Iranian thing is obviously an enormously problematic issue. You and I disagree on what to do to try to rope in Iran. You are undoubtedly infinitely more optimistic about the Iranian deal that the Obama administration is putting together, constructing, than I am. But these deals are proving, it seems to me, to be foolhardy. Syria has gotten rid of virtually none of the weapons of mass destruction that it was supposed to get rid of when the United States agreed not to go in. I'm worried about a Middle Eastern map that is entirely changing, so that Israel now has to have military plans, not only for Lebanon and, God forbid, the West Bank and whatever. It's now got a hot border on Egypt. It's got a very hot border in Syria. It's got a potentially hot border in Jordan. And of course, Iran could go nuclear. Those, it seems to me, are the most existential threats. But I don't want to minimize the importance of what Jeremy is saying. We have to get out of this arrangement with the Palestinians. We have to do it. It may take another 50 years. And is that good? No, it's not good. Is it somehow tolerable? Yes, not happily. Israel could do a much better job of trying to explain to the world why it's trying to make accommodations and how it's trying to make accommodations. We both agree. We want out of there. We may disagree a little bit about how to divide Jerusalem. We may disagree where the line should be. We may disagree, does Israel need troops along the Jordanian border, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not Israel's most existential threat, although it's a really, really, really important one. The most existential threat that Israel faces is that it is surrounded by nations and peoples, and even people that are not proximate to its border, who want to destroy it.
What makes you maddest, Jeremy?
That's an interesting question. I think that the failure to engage in this kind of substantive discussion, and when a J Street type of voice comes along, the first thing that opponents try to do is to delegitimize the voice instead of having this discussion. I can disagree with Danny about what's the nature of the threats. I can disagree with Danny about the chances of solution. I can disagree about what the United States should do, what the Palestinians should do, et cetera. And we can have a really good conversation, and I hope you all are enjoying the quality of the conversation. And Danny doesn't turn to attacks on J Street's credibility or me personally. And I think that too many people in our community, particularly from the political right, avoid this conversation on the merits and go immediately into, personal attacks, name calling, delegitimizing, belittling, and that kind of personal attack makes me really angry, because I'm in this and everybody involved in J Street is in this because of our love for Israel and because of our love of our Jewish community and our Jewish values. And to question that and to attack that rather than have this difficult conversation about the merits, to me, is unacceptable.
And there certainly is a lot more nasty stuff on the web about you than about Danny. So.
Thanks.
I'm not sure that that's true, actually. I don't Google myself very often
And there's
because
a whole
it's depressing.
movie about
but
him,
Yeah, and he stars in the movie.
I do star in the movie, but I always wanted to be an actor. I lived in LA for a while.
So why did you do that movie? Why did you agree to be part of that?
That's a whole other discussion. What
No,
makes,
I mean,
what
but
makes you
seriously.
maddest?
What makes me maddest is when I wake up in the morning and my kids have left dirty dishes in the sink. But
I'm with you.
one kid in particular. But what makes me, look, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of things that make me mad. It's my personality. We don't have enough time for me to give you the list. But I'll say that I think what makes me maddest is people opining when they don't know what in the world they're talking about. So I'll give you an example. You say, we should really also, by the way, I agree with what you said before about the ad hominem, whatever. We should also not use the word settler. You went to Shiloh, you didn't meet with settlers. You met with Israelis who lived in Shiloh. There is something about the word settler that is demeaning. You imagine this 16-year-old kid who hasn't been to high school in 3 years running around with an M16 shooting at Arabs. There are kids like that, and we don't throw them in jail enough, and we should, and that's one of the many failures of the Netanyahu government. But I wouldn't just call them settlers, because it's just like there's something about that word. You met with Israelis who live in Shiloh. Now, but that's just as an aside.
Who are there illegally?
No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
No, they're not.
Yeah, it's illegal.
Okay.
So I mean, they're not legitimately there according to international law.
Oh, wait,
You
according to
can't
international law. According
Right.
to international law. Okay,
Right.
international law. Okay, but here's what makes me maddest. Here's what makes me maddest. People here in the New York Times or on CNN or Fox. Let's be equal here. Israel
MSNBC. MSNBC.
I can't even do that one. When I watch MSNBC, I don't even have to get on the treadmill. My blood pressure goes so high so fast.
It's like me with Fox.
There you go. I just watch the television, I get into a big sweat, and I go take a shower, and I figure that must have been 500 calories. I'm good. But in any event, people say that the government is building 400 more units over the Green Line. People go ballistic. So it's in Har Homa. So I'm not asking you to answer this question, but I just want to know, among your students on various college campuses who are part of your organization, they go ballistic. How many of them on a map that didn't have any cities labeled anywhere could show me where Har Homa is? Could they tell me whether it is 500 meters from the edge of Jerusalem, a kilometer from the edge of Jerusalem, or 100 kilometers into the mountains of God only knows where in Judea and Samaria? Now, you and I both know it's about a kilometer from the edge of Jerusalem. It's effectively suburban sprawl kind of thing. Now, you could be opposed to building there.
I used to protest there against the building of it.
There you go. Okay. The place, where you used to protest is a building where my friends live. But in any event, so how effective was that for you?
Not very.
But in any event, but at least you know where it was. Look, you know your stuff. Too many people just don't know their stuff. They talk about, the settlements have to go back, but they can't distinguish between Elkanah and Karnei Shomron, which are little places in the middle of nowhere, and Ma'ale Adumim, which as of this morning had 40-something thousand people living in it, and Gilo, which is just a neighborhood of Jerusalem. We use the word settlement for all those things, and the State Department uses the word settlement for all those things. And they're very, very, very different things. And so what makes me, doesn't make me angry, I'm much more upset about the dishes in the sink. But it makes me frustrated. We're talking about the life and the death not only of Israelis, but the life and the death potentially of the Jewish state. We're talking about the future of the Jewish people. You want to opine? By all means. But don't tell me about how wrong it is to build in a place that you can't even find on a map. Let's have a certain amount of intellectual integrity.
Well, it might be easier also to find these things on the map if the maps actually had a green line on them.
By the way, one of the things that's interesting about Israeli maps and Palestinian maps is that neither map shows the green line. Right. The Palestinians show Palestine as being all of Israel, and Israeli maps today don't show the green line either.
Lebanese maps are exactly the same.
No, I think actually Israelis and Palestinians have now agreed on the map.
Right.
And you thought it would never happen.